Hello and welcome to Timeless with Julie Hartman Live. It is Monday, October 14th, 2024. I'm Julie Hartman, and it is great as always to be with you. My gosh, we have 3 weeks from now until the US presidential election. And I don't know about you, but I feel like things are eerily quiet. Well, not so quiet because yesterday there was almost a third assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which we're going to be discussing. Thankfully, that was thwarted. But it does seem, besides that, and that is obviously a pretty big besides, that it seems to be kind of mellowed out in anticipation of this election. We had the debate between Trump and Harris on September 10th. Then we had that fantastic vice presidential debate last week. I remember we couldn't do a show last week because we were filming Dennis and Julie, but my God, did JD Vance kill it? I'll tell you quickly before we move on that I had a friend who I was speaking with who is not the biggest fan of JD Vance. I have a lot of friends who actually are not the biggest fans of the people who I tend to support politically. And we were chatting and I asked her, I said, why is it that you don't like JD Vance? And she kind of couldn't answer it. She was kind of, grasping at straws. But the one thing that she did reference was this comment that apparently JD Vance made that people who don't have children should pay higher taxes. And, that is circulated as something that is so horrible and so dehumanizing and so terrible to even suggest of people who don't have children. And I paused right there and I said to her, isn't that the same thing as a child tax credit? Like, how is that any different than a child tax credit, which we know Kamala Harris and so many others tout as something that is fantastic and something that, is indicative of how much they care about working class people, about families. And I'm like, yeah, when you have a child tax credit, by definition, you're having people who don't have children pay more taxes. But, it's just part of the slander. But anyway, yes, it is Monday, October 14th. It's my 25th birthday today, everybody. Woot, woot. Quarter of a century of being alive. It's a really beautiful and great thing to be alive and to get older. I was talking with someone who was giving me some advice about approaching life as it continues going on. And she said, you know what? Don't be afraid of getting older. Be grateful. You've earned those laugh lines. You've earned those smile lines. Don't view it as something that's so bad. We culturally view getting older as something to hide or something to be upset about. But I feel very grateful today. And I'm very grateful to all of you for tuning in. In addition to my 25th birthday, I want to take a little stroll down memory lane because today, October 14th, happens to be 4 years since the New York Post posted the Hunter Biden laptop story. Can you believe that? 4 years. It was posted that there were these juicy, some would say, terrible, others would say details on the laptop, especially pertaining to the Biden family's business deals. And then just a few days later, Twitter took it down saying that it needed to be verified. And then within a few days, of course, 51 ex-CIA or other intelligence officials came out and said that it had all of the earmarks of Russian disinformation. Notice how very shrewd that was. These individuals didn't say that this was Russian disinformation, period. They said that it had all of the earmarks of Russian disinformation. That is what we call padding. That is what we call a twisting of words in order to make it look like the truth. But it's amazing to think that that was just 4 years ago. And the amount that has come out since then, obviously that was bogus. But 4 years ago, we didn't have January 6th. 4 years ago, we didn't have all of the court cases against Donald Trump. 4 years ago, we didn't have the assassination attempts. Hey, 3 months ago, we didn't even have Kamala Harris as our nominee. She's literally only been running a campaign for less than 3 months. So it really shows you just how much can change. A quick note, I want to spend a few moments today talking about this idea of an October surprise. Because as I indicated, things are eerily quiet right now with regard to both campaigns. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of waiting for a shoe to drop. Like, what is going to come out next? Is it going to be some video, something like we had back in 2015 when that grab them by the you know what video came out of Donald Trump? Is it going to be something like the FBI is launching an investigation into one of the candidates? That, of course, happened with Hillary Clinton. I don't know what it's going to be, but I think with a fair amount of certainty, we can say that an October surprise is going to happen, because almost every single election cycle, something happens in the last 3 weeks. And recently on this show, I was interviewing Bill O'Reilly, and I encourage you to check that out. He has this fantastic president series where he goes through and has about 10 pages on the various presidents. And he reminded me that actually, 2 days before the Gore and Bush election in 2000, or I guess it was in 1999 at that point when I was being born, that the story that George Bush got a DUI came out just 2 days before that 2000 election. Now, that didn't sway it significantly enough to actually have any kind of significant damage. We know that George Bush, for instance, won the election. There was some difficulty, obviously, with the counting of the votes between him and Al Gore. But you just kind of look back and you look at the 2 days before the election, the DUI comes out. You look at the tapes, the Trump tapes. You look at the Clinton FBI investigation. You look at the Hunter Biden laptop story. I'm telling you, a week from now or 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be talking to you about some story on either side. So you let me know if you disagree with that, but I definitely think that's coming. All right, let's move on. I want to talk about this third potential assassination attempt. And as crazy as it is that right now we're seeing that things are just so quiet surrounding this election, I think it really is indeed so sickening that we are not seeing a collective amount of outrage. And I would even say that belongs to both sides. Certainly those on the left and in the Democratic Party are not going to have a particular amount of sympathy for the attempts against Donald Trump's life. We know that. We have seen that both times that those attempts have happened. But even among conservatives, or even among people who care about this, we're not seeing any kind of really big reaction to the now third attempt. So here's what happened. I'm reading here from, let's see, not the New York Post. I was on the New York Post. I am reading from Forbes online. So, a man carrying loaded firearms and fake passports was arrested outside the security checkpoint near former President Donald Trump's weekend rally in Coachella, California. By the way, I don't know about you, but I saw that on Instagram, the whole lineup. The campaign did it in this very Coachella-esque formatted way. And I totally thought it was a joke. I thought it was just funny, like that he was saying that he was going to, be the headliner at Coachella in April when Coachella is usually held. But apparently it actually happened. So this guy carrying loaded firearms and fake passports was arrested outside of the security checkpoint, which law enforcement described as likely, quote, a third assassination attempt against the former president. This 49-year-old individual was, quote, stopped after presenting a fake VIP pass for the Trump rally to the deputies at the checkpoint, and upon being questioned, later informed them that he was a member of a Forbes calls it, a far-right group known as the Sovereign Citizens. Sovereign Citizens, according to online sources, is a group that contends that the government has no authority over them. They're essentially anarchists and don't believe in government authority. Now let's just pause for a moment. I say this with no with no intention to absolve the far right and far right groups from culpability and responsibility for many of their deluded and heinous activities. But it's just interesting to me that Forbes refers to this as the far right, a far right group, because Sovereign Citizens, as I said, is basically an anarchist group. I'm looking here again on Wikipedia. It believes that the courts have no jurisdiction over people and that the use of certain procedures can make one immune to government laws and regulations. Is that really far right? Like what I guess constitutes far right? It just seems like a crazy group. I guess far left is what you would call communist, and far right, I suppose, is anarchist, because of the lack of government intervention. But you take my point. Like, I don't quite understand what is so far right about this, but perhaps many of the mainstream media outlets are trying to make it look like the far right has this very dangerous presence. We know that the far left has been very open about their danger here in the United States, specifically with all of the Gaza solidarity marches, the burning of the American flags all around the country, the breaching of government or private property, as we saw on Columbia's campus. So I just don't really understand why this is called far right. But anyway, perhaps I'm wrong. Going on from Forbes, this is interesting. Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco told reporters his deputies probably did prevent a third assassination attempt against Trump. And if he was going to be accused of being dramatic, this is his words, then we have a serious problem in this country, he said. Well, he goes on. Apparently, some people were saying, and this, of course, appears to be a fringe group who is even saying this, but it's indicative of the lack of health of our country that people would even feel comfortable saying such a thing, that they were being hard on the guy that showed up with the fake passports, the fake VIP pass, the guns, that it wasn't, fully apparent that he was going to do harm. Well, hello, what else do you think this guy is going to do? So the Riverside County Sheriff said, quote, if we are that politically lost, i.e. referring to the people who are saying that the police was being too hard on this guy, then we've lost sight of common sense and reality and reason that we can't say, holy crap, what did he show up with all of that stuff for? And I'm going to be accused, he's saying, of being dramatic. We have a serious problem in this country. And it is absolutely true. I mean, it is just baffling that over the past 3 months, we had the Butler, Pennsylvania rally assassination attempt, where the president was nearly killed. He missed a shot to the head by a centimeter. Can we understand what that would have done to our country had President Trump been hit? Imagine CNN is live streaming this assassination attempt. Bizarrely, we are not usually familiar with CNN broadcasting rallies. They're broadcasting this, and he's shot live on air. Can you imagine if he hadn't turned his head and that bullet had hit him head on? Can you imagine what that would have done to our country to have a high definition, just video of the president's head being blown up? And then he would have had to, the Republican Party would have had to pick a new candidate. There would have been all of this outcry. There may have been a civil war. There certainly would have been large funeral processions, people who were outraged and protesting against the government. Like, we just have no idea We have no sense at all. By the way, as I'm talking about this, not only would we have all the aforementioned things, but perhaps foreign adversaries would use that as a particularly turbulent time to, I don't know, wreak further havoc on the United States, do some of the things such as China and Taiwan that they have been iridescently lusting over. I mean, that could have been so bad. And we got saved from that by a millimeter. That should have really awoken us to some deep rot in our country. But even people on the right have forgotten about this. Even people on the right aren't even talking about it. Then we have that guy in Palm Beach sticking the gun out of this chain linked fence. And then he runs away. Thank God Secret Service captured him. And we're like, oh, well, just another attempt. And then we have this. Who the heck is this guy? This is 3 times in 3 months. And it really makes it seem like there is a perhaps organized effort. I don't know from whom. I don't know that this very could well be separate. I'm not trying to imply anything here. I'm truly just speculating. But when you have 3 people in 3 months getting dangerously close to the president, you can't help but wonder if there's some kind of thread there, if there's some kind of organization there. Because here's the thing. Donald Trump launched his campaign a year ago. We all knew he was going to run for office. He's been on the trail for so long. What has changed over the past 3 months? What changed was that Joe Biden had to drop out. What changed is that at the end of June, there was that disastrous debate where President Biden made a fool of himself. And then there was a war between the elites in the Democratic Party, the people who control the Democratic Party, and the Biden family over whether or not he was going to be the nominee. It seems like something has changed where the stakes have become different. And there is just a bizarrely motivated and perhaps unified and organized effort to kill this man. So let us hope, as we say time and time again, that this is the last thing that would happen, but we don't know. We don't know. Okay, the final story I want to discuss today, as we're leading up to this election, we've talked about the possibility of an October surprise. We've talked about the 3rd assassination attempt against Trump. There is a very interesting, I think, lack of understanding of the international stakes that we have in this upcoming election. And I know that I've talked about this a bit. This has been a theme of the show over the past few weeks. I did a show about the National Commission of Defense's report that we are closer to a major near-term war than we have been since 1945. This is a direct quote from the National Commission of Defense. And that unlike during the Cold War, again, directly quoting from them, we were prepared then, but we're not prepared now. I interviewed Brandon Weichert to talk about the situation in Ukraine. Zelensky is uncovering a new victory strategy, as he calls it, to shoot conventional weapons into the interior of Russia. They did this on August 6th in Kursk. Kursk is a region that is bordering Russia, and Zelensky used American and British weapons to actually debilitate that region, to destroy villages, to destroy bridges. And actually, Zelensky's asking for permission from the Biden administration to further attack the interior of Russia. We've talked about all of those things, but I think I want to focus our final few minutes here on some other vulnerabilities that I think that we as Americans are just not getting a handle over. We're not understanding, as I've discussed, the global events, the widening war in Ukraine, which for all of their successes isn't seeming to lead to something close to a long-term solution, the aforementioned ever-widening war in Russia. In addition to those things, I don't think that we Americans have a grasp on the kind of internal vulnerabilities that we have, specifically unconventional warfare. Iran, after the ballistic missile strike that Iran exacted on Israel about 2 weeks ago, and Israel promised a significant response, Iran said that they are now contemplating moving into a new category of what they would call unconventional warfare. And I think what this means is not landing troops on the ground or sending in ships or doing the normal things, dropping bombs, though of course that could happen, but things that are kind of new in the 21st century that could be uniquely wielded against us. And if there's one thing that Americans don't understand, it's our vulnerabilities for something like that to happen. So, what do I mean by this? Well, something we've talked about a few times on this show is that we are really, really vulnerable in the United States to a cyber attack. Our FBI director, Christopher Wray, said that China is implanting malware in our infrastructure, quote, at a greater scale than we'd seen before. Now, what does that mean? What do you think is going to happen there? You think that China's just doing that for fun, for child's play? They're doing it for a reason. They're not going to implant malware in our infrastructure just for the sake of implanting malware in our infrastructure. We know that China also recently hacked the UK Ministry of Defense. The Wall Street Journal did an article recently about the army of cyber spies that Beijing is rolling out in order to harm the United States. And today, there's another article saying, quote, from the Wall Street Journal, the scale of Chinese spying overwhelms Western governments. Fears of escalation as China's intelligence gathering operation looks to consolidate Xi Jinping's grip on power. Then reading here, it said the Federal Bureau of Investigation said that a Chinese-linked firm hacked 260,000 internet-connected devices, including cameras and routers in the United States, Britain, France, Romania, and elsewhere. And then get a load of this. A congressional probe said that Chinese cargo cranes used at U.S. seaports have embedded technology that could allow Beijing to secretly control them. So we're seeing that they are implanting malware. They have successfully come in and overtaken or gotten access to several of our internet connected devices. And then here, we don't contemplate that the cranes, the terminals at ports, the massive amounts of technology that we get from Beijing are perhaps being used with devices implanted in them that are interoperable and could allow Beijing to control them remotely. So what if all of a sudden a crane starts acting out of control? Or what if all of a sudden, something malfunctions and our internet in the United States is down for a day? I mean, I know that sounds like not that big of a deal. It would debilitate a lot of our economy. What if our financial system was down for the day? What if the stock market just kind of like crashed? I don't mean the actual market. I mean the infrastructure, the technology, the tracking of the market. Do we think about these things? Are we talking about these things leading up to the election? But it's not just cyber stuff. Our electric and power utilities, our fuel infrastructure, our systems of finance, our medical equipment and records. We have all of these systems that are part of a 21st century way of life. And they're great that they've led to the abundance and the spectacular convenience and prosperity of our 21st century way of life. But they are all interconnected and they are all used with very delicately calibrated software that with a power like Beijing could be taken over. I mean, think about when you go, for instance, to get a prescription. In the olden days, what would happen, the olden days meaning like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the doctor would fax over a prescription to the pharmacist, or you would get handed a note yourself and then you would deliver that to the pharmacist. Now we have all of these computer systems where they just log on, send over a prescription. When you go into the doctor, they have all of your medical records there on a file. Our healthcare system is so connected. What if that were just to not work? What if they debilitated our machinery in hospitals, where our scanning systems wouldn't work, where our what are the breathing ventilators wouldn't work? What if our electricity goes down and a ventilator that someone is on doesn't work? Do we have backups for these things? Are we equipped to handle it? The National Commission of Defense says we're not. I may have mentioned our water system. These things that are just kind of, we view as a birthright to us, can all be accessed and controlled remotely. They're all interoperable, and can also be taken over by someone who is able to simulate an authorized user of the network that manages them. And even if these systems are hardened, even if they have some kind of superb mechanisms to prevent hacking, here's another thing that I don't think we as a country are considering. AI. AI is becoming like its own independent entity. What if you could just get to a point one day where you could say, hey, give me the password to da 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 da. Give me the login information for XYZ. Are you telling me artificial intelligence wouldn't have the capability to do that? So that's a scary thing that I'm especially paying attention to, because I don't think a lot of other people are paying attention to. I'll give you two other examples of things that we really, really ought to be taking more seriously, and we especially ought to be considering in the wake of this upcoming election. And as global conflicts are ever increasing, we as a nation are wholly dependent upon satellites for defense, for telecommunications, and for transportation, but certainly defense. But even if you look at your phone, if you look at GPS, how does GPS work? GPS sends a signal up to a satellite, and the satellite works actually with other satellites to get a kind of sense of where you are. If we had problems with our satellites, we would be at a spectacularly debilitating disadvantage. And we know that two of our adversaries, that is China and Russia, have deployed what's called killer satellites, whose only purpose is to destroy US and allied satellites in a time of hostility. Like, they literally have killer satellites up in space, just totally meant to debilitate us. And if they launched an attack on our satellites, again, this is all under the auspices of unconventional warfare, which Iran has promised, which China has promised. They've talked about unconventional warfare. If China and Russia use killer satellites to knock out one of our satellites, they are rendering us deaf and blind during a conflict. They are impairing our ability to respond or even continue our normal civilian way of life. And at the risk of sounding really pessimistic, I think that COVID was kind of an appetizer to this. I think that the unleashing of this debilitating virus and seeing the way that people would respond, suspending our economy, suspending our schools, suspending our way of life for months, was a little bit of a test drive of what are the clandestine or behind the scenes kind of mechanisms that we might be able to undertake in order to commit warfare against our enemies. Because the great thing about that kind of strategy is that even though it's very aggressive, it kind of leaves no fingerprints. It's like the fentanyl strategy. It's like sell the fentanyl to the Mexican drug cartels who funnel it across our border. That is killing Americans. That is a direct act of warfare, but you can do that kind of with leaving no fingerprints. And then the final example, and I'm telling you this in this episode, giving you a little bit of a preview because I'm actually writing an article on how we seem to be closer to major term war than we've been, how we seem to be more vulnerable and susceptible to unconventional war that is a product of our way of life. I'm giving you a little bit of a taste here. You know, we underestimate the staggering capabilities and advancements of drone technology. It's a little disconcerting that we don't see more kind of military information coming from the United States government. You know, other countries, when their militaries do drills, it's like a cause for celebration, or it's you know, a source of pride, a source of national unity that they were able to do that. Here in the United States, we don't seem, and maybe we're kept in the dark about it, but we don't seem to have a military that is priding itself upon advancement. And we are at a massive disadvantage to our enemies with regard to drones. There was recently an excellent article in the National Review and the Free Press about how we are not keeping up with Russia and China with drone technology. And drones have really negated the advantage of high value and bulky weapons like tanks and helicopters and naval vessels. If you've got a drone that can bomb or take out, a region, think about it. A drone is low cost. It's a tiny size. It's very easily maneuverable. It can be heavily destructive. Why do we need the outdated equipment of helicopters or of planes if we can have something like that? Another thing is that drones fly really, really low. Sometimes, Israel, for instance, has this spectacular Iron Dome system, but that is supposed to intercept intermediate range or intercontinental ballistic missiles, really. Does that have the ability to detect very low flying drones? Imagine if one of our adversaries, for instance, placed a nuclear, and we know that 3 out of our 4 adversaries, China, Russia, and North Korea, are nuclear powers. Imagine if one of our adversaries placed a nuclear or a chemical or a biological weapon on a drone and could just send it over into the United States. That would debilitate us and catch us by surprise, which is the worst thing at all, in a way that we can't even imagine. And so, forgive me if this is being a bit, pessimistic, but I think actually I even regret giving that kind of aside, because this is just something that we have to face. We have to be clued in to the advancements in military technology. Everybody's all about the vanguard things, the in vogue things about health, about wellness, about, AI, about cryptocurrency. But then when it comes to these mechanisms of warfare, as we're involved in 2 foreign wars and as our adversaries are seemingly intent upon harming us, we couldn't care about the killer satellites or about the drones. And something that I hope all Americans are aware of is that we are very much in the dark about these things. And we also have domestic divisions, we have financial problems, we have border control problems, which are making us even more vulnerable to such an act and even less capable to appropriately and forcefully respond should such a thing happen. And so on that happy note, that's just to say, I think we got to clue in here a little bit. It's really quiet right now. There may be a kind of October surprise. And as things are heating up, I think that we ought to be really shrewd about realizing the vulnerable situation that we're in. And I'm laughing because it really is kind of pessimistic, but do what you can. Do what you can to protect yourself. Like Ben Shapiro is selling these at-home equipment things. Like you should have beef jerky in large supply. You should have water in large supply. How many Americans have those things? Again, even if it's just something like a cyber attack that knocks us out for a few days, that could put down the electric grid. Grocery stores, they're going to be storing things in refrigerators that are going to go bad and are going to melt, and people are going to be rushing the grocery stores. We're in a very volatile time. I want everybody to be very safe. And so just do what you can. If our country generally is not eyes wide open to this kind of situation, you should probably be. And another suggestion as we head out is, did you see that Costco is selling gold bars? Costco has started selling these little rectangular, as I just said, gold bars, and they're selling off of the shelves. like by the hundreds. In fact, Costco said it's only going to be a few more weeks until they get back more because there are so many people who are buying them. So that shows that people are kind of aware that they have to protect themselves. And one person we certainly hope will continue to be protected is President Trump. So thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow in studio. I'm going to be interviewing Spencer Clavin for our Thinker of the Month series. And spoiler alert, Spencer Clavin is actually the Thinker of the Month tomorrow because he released a new book called Light of the Mind, Light of the World, how science is illuminating ancient truths about God. It's so cool. It shows how science and a belief in God are not incompatible. And I guess what's even cooler about the whole thing is that yours truly has a blurb on the back of the book. So I hope that you'll stay tuned then. Thank you so much. And let's hope things remain quiet. Though, as I said, I highly doubt that. I'll see you tomorrow. You can always email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. I love hearing from you. Be well and take care.